ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste my dear friends. This is second video on Vichar Sagar of Swami Nishchalananda. Vichar Sagar is the most important book on Advaita Vedanta. It is translated in most of the Indian languages, and you talk to any sadhu in India about Vichar Sagar, they will be ready to explain the philosophy of Vichar Sagar. So it is a very, very important book. I have started making video on original book of Vichar Sagar and simplified version of Vichar Sagar both in Hindi, and now I have started making videos on Vichar Sagar in English. So on the ascertainment of reality and the happiness it yields. Introductory stanza. I am that pure and infinite self who is bliss eternal, manifested, all pervading, and the substratum of all that has name and form, whom the intellect cannot discern but who discerns it, imperishable, without a beginning, Hari, Vishnu, Mahesh, Sun, Moon, Varun, Yam, Force, Dhanesh, Ganesh, an object of meditation for devout sages everywhere, who is all kindness and consciousness, his associate am I. Thus to consider him as an associate is illusion or false knowledge. Who knows not him confounds the objective world for something real in the same way as a snake is created in a cord, but who looks the world as poisonous as a snake is a real knower of self, and such self is to be recognized as actionless, pure, and beautiful. To him I offer my salutation. To one acquainted with the mode of worship which a non dualist adopts, the introductory stanza needs no explanation, but it is otherwise with the generality of readers who may conclude it an height of impertinence thus to raise one's own self to the dignity of the Supreme Brahma, the absolute and unknowable of Western pantheists, as the author evidently does in the opening line. On this subject, the Panchadasi says self indicated by the signs of bliss, sentiency, etc., is the impartite supreme self. I am that self. In this way is he to be worshipped, but then Brahma is an impersonality, actionless, without any attributes, yet to differentiate it by the indications of felicity, intelligence, etc., may appear puzzling and inconsistent, inasmuch as it virtually amounts to an admission of personality in impersonality. We find it distinctly laid down in all Vedantic works that this is neither inconsistent nor unauthoritative. In the Sariraka Sutras, chapter 3, book 2, verse 11 and 33, Vyas expounds Brahma in the concluding portion of his chapter in that way. As a pantheist, the author is at perfect liberty with right and consistency in his side to put his Brahma in Hari, Vishnu, Mahesh, in short, anywhere and everywhere. For Brahma is here a first principle and not a personal God. As such, it is everywhere present and at all times. Even the meanest tadpole that thrives in the smallest accumulation of water collected in a roadside ditch has its Prabrahma equally with the mightiest emperor that rules the mightiest nation on the surface of earth. Ob- Objects. What is eternal bliss, self manifested, all pervading, and substrate of name and form, whom intellect cannot discern, but who discerns it? I am that pure self and infinite. This is its paraphrase. The purport is to establish non duality, that is to say, the individual spirit or Atma is non different from the universal spirit, Parbrahma, the Absolute, after the manner of the transcendental Vedic phrase that art thou, or I am Brahma, etc. But that Supreme Self or Brahma has peculiar characterizing traits, his predicate, which are being set forth as follows. He is joy, self manifested, all pervading, and substrate of all that has name and form. Moreover, intellect cannot discern him, but he discerns it. That is to say, the function of a word's strength cannot influence the individual's intellect in such a manner as to help the cognition or perception of Brahma, but he can only be perceived by the indications of a word acting upon the function of the internal organ. A person whose intellect is faulty and impure cannot perceive him, but one whose intellect is pure and faultless discovers him. It is to be understood from this interpretation that a person pure in intellect knows the Brahma not by the pervasion of the result, but by the pervasion of the modification of the internal organ, and as the light of a lamp discovers another object, the modification of the internal organ has not a similar power of discovering the Brahma, but like a covered object discovered by breaking the cover which conceals it. So, by removing the ignorance which rests on Brahma, it is discovered for its self luminosity, and therefore Brahma stands in no need of the intellect. He is the discoverer of all objects. Consequently, he is said to be not a subject of discovery for the intellect, though he discerns it. In this manner is established his self luminosity. Moreover, Brahma is pure and infinite. These are the indications of differentiation. That is to say, if Brahma were only bliss, then it would be mistaken for material happiness or with the property of felicity which a Nyayika attributes to self. To prevent such misconceptions, the blissfulness of Brahma is said to be eternal. Material happiness is non eternal, and the attribution of felicity to self is also non eternal according to the Nyayikas. If Brahma were only eternal, then as as ether, time, and etc. are also regarded in Nyaya to be eternal, consequently, there will be a pervasion of mistake, that is to say, Brahma would in that case be mistaken with ether, time, and the rest. Hence, with the eternal Brahma, the indication of self luminosity is added because though ether is said to be eternal, yet its luminosity is not admitted in Nyaya. On the other hand, it is said to be insentient. Thus, then, coupling luminosity and blissfulness as indications of Brahma with its eternal nature, all sources of fallacy and misconception are removed. For the luminosity of the sun and the luminosity of intelligence, a property of self, can lay no claim of identity with Brahma, as they are transient and non eternal, because the supporters of the transient theory of intelligence say all acts of consciousness follow like a continuous current of water in which a second conception succeeds a prior one, and so on. While Brahma is pervasion, the sun is luminous, but that luminosity is finite and not all pervading. A Nyayika does not admit the pervasion of self but looks upon him as finite. In the same way, the transient intelligence or consciousness is also regarded as finite and not all pervading. Therefore, Brahma has been described as self luminous and all pervading. If you say Brahma is only all pervading, then as ether, akas, or space, time, quarters, etc., are similarly regarded in Nyaya, and as the different other schools, Prabhakar, Sankhya, and etc., put a similar construction on the properties of self, prakriti, etc., there is a likelihood of Brahma being mistaken with all and every one of them. Hence, to do away with such a misconception, Brahma's pervasion is coupled with substrate. That is to say, it is not only pervasion but substrate of everything that exist, for name and form are indications of creation. Now, ether and the rest are pervasive, but they are not the substrate of name and form. Similarly, Nyayika and Prabhakar regard self, Atma, to be pervasive, but they do not admit him to be the substrate of name and form. Kapila looks upon his Prakriti in a similar light of pervasion, but not as the substrate of all things that have name and form. Thus, then, its difference is clearly established by the indications set forth in the above manner, and there is no chance for a mistake or misconception. Similarly, to regard Brahma as the substrate of name and form to open to misconception, inasmuch as the illusion of a snake in a cord produces both name and form, which are perfectly unreal. Hence, to prevent such a fallacy, it is said to be undiscernible by the intellect, but is the discoverer of that intellect, that is self luminous. Now, coupling it with this one predicate, self luminous, precludes all sources of mistake with other substances set up by the other sects from the indications of Brahma. Moreover, according to the Vedanta, in the illusory creation or superimposition of a snake in a cord, the substrate of the snake's name and form is said to be the intelligence associated with the rope and not the rope itself, and that only ordinary or gross perception of the snake is produced for the time being, to be removed after the discovery of mistake. Yet even here the instance does not clearly apply, because for the presence of that one predicate already indicated with the other indications of Brahma undiscernible by the intellect. If Brahma were only admitted to be self luminous, then, as there are worshippers who regard their object of worship as self Atma in the same light, there is consequently a mistake of Brahma with self. To prevent it, Brahma is said to be pure. Now, those worshippers regard self to be self luminous, but then, as he has the impurities of ignorance, avidya present in him. Thus, then, by connecting the self luminosity of Brahma with purity, the apparent contradiction is cleared. If it be affirmed that Brahma is pure only, then a source of fallacy crops up. For according to Kapila, Atma is regarded as pure, hence Brahma will be mistaken with self. To preclude it, Brahma has another indication, and that is infinite. Now, the author of the Sankhya philosophy does not take self to be infinite. Hence, this distinction is enough for the purpose of distinguishing Brahma from self. Time, place are all considered as indestructible in the Sankhya system, but all material substances dependent on them are prone to destruction, hence, they are not infinite. But Brahma is infinite to the best sense of the term. It depends not on time, place, etc., hence indestructible. Though for the purpose of removing all unnatural inferences, it may be remarked that the connection of two such predicates as joy, eternal, etc., is enough. The introduction of several predicates has been used to help an enquirer of truth to know Brahma by its several indications from different standpoints. And I am that Brahma which has all these predicates. This is the purport of the stanza. But it may be alleged that in the introduction, the usual valedictory address ought to be made either to Vishnu, Shiva, or the other devas, and to throw them into the shade and introduce self in this manner is improper. That imputation is cleared in the following verse. To a non dualist who regards Brahma and self to be non different, what is more proper than that mistake, as it is called here, to be confirmed? It is the dictum of the Vedanta Upanishads and forms the subject of the present treatise. But the doctrine of non duality is in the opposite direction. Self is mistaken with Brahma and taken for such, so that no separate cognition of the self remains. This is meant. Nothing was further from the author's mind than to introduce a contradiction in the opening passage of his work. He has taken pains to establish non duality, and yet to introduce duality is absurd. Next stanza. From Vishnu Mahesh, it is an infinite succession to law nature. Sun, Moon, Varuna, Yama, Shakti, Dhanesh, and Ganesh. Like a never ending sea with its continuous train of waves, Vishnu, Mahesh, and the rest are all a continued succession of devas indicated by the waves of the sea and infinite too, and they are each and all of them equally identical with myself. Thus, then in praising self, they have all been duly praised, and the impropriety of praising self is removed. But it may be said that Vishnu and Shiva can properly be looked upon as Ishvara's waves and not of yours or yourself. Hence, it is necessary that the work must open with a praise of Ishvara, as by watering the roots of a tree, its trunk and leaves are all satiated. So, by praising Ishvara alone, all devas are praised, and by praising your individual self, no praising of the devas can follow. But there is no such apprehension as will appear in the sequel immediately next stanza. That kind God who is omniscient, an object of contemplation for the wise, whom to connect with an associate is false knowledge. That kind Isvara is contemplated by all devout sages, and his associate of Maya is as unreal as a snake in a cord or a city created in a dream, so that by seeking to praise him, if self be duly praised, it applies to him, for to contrive his difference is only imaginary. But that Isvara resembles the pure Brahma, and as you cannot claim an identity with it, consequently, it is proper that the impersonal Brahma without attributes be duly mentioned in the introductory stanza, and by speaking well of it, all will be equally praised. That cannot follow from the from praising yourself, but it is otherwise. Next stanza. Without its knowledge, the world appears real. But like the knowledge of a rope removing the snake, its knowledge reduces the world to nothing and self is identical with it. As ignorance of a rope produces a snake on it, which is removed when all the parts of that rope are fully known, so a full knowledge of Dharma reduces the objective world into its normal condition of unreality, and there is no more any hankering left either for the world or its goods, and a man is, so to speak, on the road to emancipation, and I am that pure Brahma. And there is no difference whatever between them when regarded in the light of a part and whole, modified and modifier, or worshipper and worshipped. And in the absence of that difference, there is likewise a want of the other subservient conditions or relations which of cause and luminosity, container and contained. Consequently, myself is proved to be without them, so that by praising self, Brahma is duly praised. Now, there is yet another difficulty. You belong to the sect of Dadu Panthis, who are worshippers of Ramachandra, and as such, it is very proper that you should invoke a blessing from your guardian deity by duly propitiating him with the necessary praise or valediction. For a satisfactory solution of this point, the concluding lines of the verse say, one must want a good perception and have good deeds to worship Ram without motive. I am that Ram, and him I offer my reverence. That Ram who is only to be worshipped by good deeds performed without a motive of reward, either here or hereafter, when only can a person have his perception cleared in a manner as to perceive him, is non-different from myself, hence in the absence of an object of worship or of devotion, to whom am I to offer my reverence? That is why I pay my respects to no one. Or it means a person who, for a clear perception of the Supreme Brahma, has served Ram with good actions without any aim of being benefited, and whose self is non different from Parbrahma, has no other object for his reverence, as all are included in his self, who is the abiding intelligence, and in the absence of such another object different from self, no proper worship can be tended to it. Remarks prefatory. The sutras, their commentaries, and other works in Sanskrit. There are many and several, yet I speak in vernacular for them who are dull in intellect. Though the Sanskrit is replete with the Vedanta, Siddhanta, and similar other works, yet the present one cannot be termed futile inasmuch as persons of dull intellect will fail to profit by the instruction imparted in the learned language, while no such apprehension needs to be entertained with regard to Vichar Sagar, as it is written in the vernacular, which man of ordinary caliber shall be able to comprehend. Hence, for them it is useful. By poets, many works have been written in vernacular, well known are they in the world, but without seeing the Vichar Sagar, doubts cannot be dispelled. And so far as language is concerned, there may be many other works like it, but none of them can remove the doubts concerning the reality self, which the Vichar Sagar alone is capable of doing. For several of the authors have written their works after hearing and are therefore full of errors. Besides, in some places they impart instruction in direct antagonism to the sacred writings, owing to their authors' inability to comprehend their real significance, as for instance, the work known as Panchabhak, Panchabhaka. Then again, there are others who have written with a partial knowledge of the sacred writings, such as Atma Bodh. Hence, they are quite incompetent to clear away the doubts in regard to the Atma, spirit, or seventh principle in man. While there are others who have not thoroughly adopted the method of the Vedanta. Moreover, the present work is complete in itself. It follows the Vedanta text closely and is nowhere opposed to it. It deals particularly on subjects that help knowledge of the self. Hence, it is unlike the rest in the vernacular bhakka, but superior to them all. Section 1. Thus, having the Vedanta doctrine for its subject, the present work is moved by similar considerations. Without them, a seeker of knowledge will have no inclination for the work, hence, I proceed to consider them. These are 1. The qualified person or fit vessel, adhikari. 2. The relation, sambandha. 3rd. The subject, vishaya. 4th. The necessity to dispel ignorance concerning the non-duality to be demonstrated and to acquire the blissfulness of Brahma. Prayojana. There are three defects in all subjects of the internal organ Antahakarna, namely Mal, Vikshepa, and Avarna. Abstaining the mind from works done with the desire of reward will cleanse it of all impurities. Mal. Devotional exercises Upasana will remove misapprehension, vikshepa, and knowledge, concealment, or want of apprehension, avarna. One free from impurity and misapprehension, but only ignorant, who is possessed of all the means, is called a person qualified in intellect. 1. The qualified individual is a person who, by the performing of actions without a motive of reward and devotional exercises, have got rid of all impurities, mal, and misapprehension, vikshepa, and who is subject of one ignorance, call it avarna, concealment or want of apprehension, and endowed with the four means of knowledge. The four means sadhana are sadhana chatushta in Sanskrit. 1. Discrimination between things eternal and non-eternal, that is transient. It is called viveka. 2. Indifference to the enjoyment of reward in this life or the next, vairagya. 3. Possession of quiescence, self-restraint, faith, concentration, abstinence, and endurance, sat sampati. And 4. Desire for emancipation, mumukshutva. 1. Discrimination between eternal and non-eternal is to know self to be eternal, imperishable, and actionless, and is the only substance of his kind, while the objective world is non eternal and perishable, that is to say, antagonistic in nature to self. It is the basis of the other means for indifference, and the rest are produced from it. Without it, they are absent. Hence, it is the source or cause of the other means from indifference to emancipation. A sage acquainted with the drift of the Vedas calls him indifferent who bent on the attainment of a Brahma discards all other things for they prevent his wish being realized too. Indifference to the enjoyment of reward in this life or the next. This consists in an utter disregard for enjoyments either in this life or the next. For as shown in the Vedas, they are the products of actions, and actions are non eternal. Hence, such enjoyments, be it nectar or the blissful abode of heaven, must necessarily be of short duration, and with their cessation or destruction, the individual will be hurled to rebirths. All wise men therefore discard them. 3. quiescence, self-restraint, and the four other substances are A. Quiescence Sama, B. Self-restraint Dama, C. Faith Shraddha, D. Concentration of thought Samadhana, E. Abstinence Uprati, F. Endurance Titiksha. They are now being defined. A. Quiescence or passivity. Sama is to keep the mind aloof from subjects which stand in the way of attaining knowledge of self. One possessed of it is called tranquil. B. Self restraint. Dhamma consists in the restraining of the external organs of sense, and a person who has so subdued his senses is justly called an intellectual hero. See, faith, Shraddha, is to believe the utterance of the Vedas and one's spiritual perceptor. D. Concentration of thought, Samadhana, is the destruction of all mental objects. They distract the mind and hence prevent an individual from concentrating his mind already subjugated and turned away from sensuous objects on self. E. Abstinence Uparti is to abstain from all works after having been possessed of the four means of knowledge, to look upon all sorts of enjoyments as poison, or to abandon the prescribed acts in the manner laid down in the Shastras by turning into an ascetic. F. Endurance Titiksha is to bear the extremes of heat and cold, hunger and thirst, pleasure and pain with equanimity. These six substances constitute one of the means and are not reckoned so many by a person possessed of discrimination. The acquisition of quiescence and the rest called the six substances is looked upon as one of the four means of practice to attain deliverance, and not as so many distinct or new, and a person possessing them is called one full of discrimination, for they help to produce discrimination whereby an individual is enabled to distinguish the eternal from the non eternal. 4. Emancipation is to attain Brahma and to destroy bondage. What subjects a man to continued rebirths is called bondage. One desirous of release is a prince of sages. The attainment of Brahma and destruction of evil are indications of emancipation or deliverance, and to wish for them is known by the term desire of release, mumuksha. This word and emancipation are synonymous. These are the four means of practice for acquiring self knowledge, with the three: A. Hearing Sarvana, B. Consideration Manana, C. Profound contemplation Nididhyasana, and the ascertaining of the real significance of that, tat, and thou, tvam, in the transcendental phrase that are that art thou, tatu, tatum, tattvamasi. They are altogether 8 in number. That is to say, discrimination and the three others together with hearing, consideration, profound contemplation, and the ascertainment of the real indication of that and thou non-duality constitute the 8 means for acquiring knowledge of self. These 8 are the internal, while sacrifice and other offerings are the external means. One engaged in the practice of the internal parts company with the external. The 8 means already mentioned, commencing with discrimination and ending in the ascertainment of the real significance of that and thou are called internal, while sacrifice and other similar works yaga are the external means of acquiring knowledge of self. Of these, the last are to be avoided, and the former alone to be practiced by a seeker of truth. They are called internal because from hearing or knowing them, apparent or visible results Pratyaksha are produced. Discrimination and the other 3 are subservient to that hearing, inasmuch as a dull person without them cannot ascertain the drift of the sacred writings from hearing them, and in the same way hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation are subservient to knowledge of self, for one cannot have any knowledge without them. In like manner, without the ascertainment of the real indication of the words that and thou, the knowledge of non duality, the individual and universal spirits are one, cannot arise. Thus is determined the subserviency of the 4 means: discrimination, indifference, etc., to hearing, and the subserviency of hearing, consideration, and contemplation to knowledge. Hence, they are called the 8 internal means. The external means do not yield visible results, but clear the mind of all ill wishes by hearing or prac- practicing them. For instance, the sacrificial offerings and similar other works. As a rule, they are the ordinary practices of our daily concern in life, and hence worldly, and it is quite possible that a person engaged in their performance with a motive of reward becomes pure in mind, but then they hurl him to consecutive rebirths hereafter, to which they stand as cause. For consummation of works is life, and therefore what he has sown in this he must reap in the next, and so on till final deliverance. But for one who is without any desire of reaping any benefits from them, or who assigns all actions to the Lord Isvara and acts as guided by him, the above sacrifices and other works are merely conductive of making his mind pure and faultless, hence their cause. Thus, by his purity of mind, he derives knowledge of self, and hence they are its source, and therefore they are called the external or distant, while the internal are the proximate. Practice of the external means sacrifice and the rest, or abandoning a wife, children, and property, are for the acquisition of self knowledge. They constitute a qualified person. But for such a qualified person, it is very unlikely that he shall be engaged in sacrifice and the above works, hence they are distant. Discrimination and the rest behoving of a qualified individual are therefore near or proximate. But then there is this difference that discrimination are beneficial to hearing as hearing is beneficial to knowledge. In such a consideration of discrimination, hearing and the rest are comparatively speaking internal, while with regard to the latter, the former are external. Though discrimination and the rest have been described as the internal means for the acquisition of self knowledge and not the external means in all works, yet they yield visible results in connection with hearing, which are therefore as acceptable to a seeker of truth as hearing and the rest. But that does not hold true with reference to sacrifice and similar works, which are therefore unacceptable to him. Hence, they are called internal. In relation to sacrifice, they are also internal. Here, even they are recognized as the internal means of self knowledge, and if it be duly considered, it will be found that prior to such knowledge, ascertainment of the real indication of that and thou in the transcendental phrase that art thou is the principal means for such knowledge. Moreover, hearing and the rest are not alluded as such means for hearing. Sarvana is to ascertain the drift of the Vedas by analysis and argument. Consideration manana is the unceasing reflection on the non duality of the individual self and secondless reality Brahma with arguments for and against. Profound contemplation nididhyasana is the continuance of ideas conformable to Brahma to the exclusion of the notion of body and such other inconsistent things with it. Meditation samadhi is a ripe condition of the above profound contemplation, so that it is included in it and not a separate means. Now, all these are not the direct means for practicing self knowledge, but they cause the destruction of impossible and inconsistent ideas and thus clear the intellect of all its blemishes and frailties. Doubts are looked upon as impossible ideas, and antagonistic are the inconsistent. Hearing of the Vedanta doctrine clears away any lurking doubts concerning the proofs adduced to support the subject. Consideration removes such doubts in regard to what is to be proved. Whether the utterances of the Vedanta seek to expound the second-less reality, Brahma, or something different, any doubts as to the proofs adduced in support of the subject is it seeks to demonstrate are cleared by hearing. Moreover, consideration removes all doubts as to whether non-duality or duality is true, and of them non-duality is the subject that is to be explained. To know the body organs as real and to consider the individual self and Brahma as twain are called inconsistent ideas. They are antagonistic to self knowledge and are removed by profound contemplation. In this way, hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation destroy impossible and inconsistent ideas which stand in the way as obstacles to such knowledge. And inasmuch as such obstacles are removed by hearing, therefore the latter are looked upon as the source of knowledge and called so. But then they are not the direct or evident cause. The direct means for self knowledge is to hear the utterances of the Vedanta, that is to say, to ascertain their drift, as has already been explained while defining hearing. Vedantic utterances are of two kinds: one avantara, two Mahavakya or involved and transcendental. The first signifies such words as help the cognition of either the supreme self or the individual self. The second has reference to non duality and establishes the oneness of the individual self and Brahma. Hence, the words employed with this object are termed transcendental. The first produces knowledge marked by indivisibility as Brahma is existent, while the second establishes knowledge marked by visible as I am Brahma. Thou art Brahma is pronounced by the teacher to create a relation between the pupil and Brahma, which he no sooner perceives than he exclaims, I am Brahma, and thus acquires visible knowledge, knowledge in which Brahma is established as a visibility, inasmuch as the first personal pronoun used in conjunction with the subject of his knowledge, Brahma is involved in no mystery, but something tangible, apparent, and visible, and when such tangibility is extended to Brahma by the non difference existing between the two, then the last also is rendered alike apparent and visible. For this conditional relationship between the pupil who hears the words and the percepts conveyed by them through the means of hearing, the words relating to that hearing are determined as the cause of knowledge, with this difference that the included or involved words relating to that hearing are called the source of invisible knowledge, while the transcendental under similar conditions are the source of visible knowledge. Thus, then, the transcendental words bring forth only visible and not invisible knowledge to everyone. But it has been alleged by the professor of another province, dissenter, that by means of hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation in connection with the words is only produced the visible knowledge, and by words only, without hearing and the rest, the invisible and not the visible knowledge. For it is sure, if words will produce such visible knowledge, then the necessity for hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation ceases altogether. But this apprehension is unfounded inasmuch as they are needed for excluding or removing the impossible and inconsistent ideas which one may hold concerning the Brahma or its non difference with the individual self. Hence, we find though words help the cognition of the Brahma as visible and hearing, and the rest are useful in the manner aforesaid as expounded in the Siddhanta. Yet one may contend that after the knowledge of the visible kind has been attained by a person, he is no more apt to blend it up with impossible or inconsistent ideas, so that to an advocate of words as the only means helping the visible knowledge, the ascertainment of the real signification of the transcendental phrase, that art thou, is alone sufficient not only to produce such knowledge but also to exclude all impossible and inconsistent ideas, and consequently hearing and the rest are futile and unnecessary. Now, for the opposite doctrine, words only produce the invisible, and practice of hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation produces the visible knowledge. In such a view, hearing are not looked upon as futile, but though this doctrine has been adopted by several authors, it is not true. For it is in the nature of words to discern dimly an object which is covered, and they cannot reduce it to a visible condition. As for instance, the knowledge derivable from derivable derivable from the sacred writings about heaven and its devas, Indra, and the rest. And when an object is uncovered, then it is rendered apparent or visible by words as well as inapparent or invisible. When words are used to indicate the existence of an uncovered object, then only the invisible knowledge is proved as the tenth person is. Here, the neuter verb implies existence, which refers to the tenth that is near. Hence, words establish the invisible knowledge. But when words bring in the conception of a near object and reduce it to reduce it into the condition of this, is then only visible knowledge is said to be established by them and not the invisible. As for instance, Dasamata tenth Dasmata tenth is. In this way, words establish the existence of tenth and render it visible. Similarly, Brahma, for its being the all-pervading spirit present in every individual self, is extremely close or near. Hence, an included word rendered existent is capable of reducing Brahma into a visibility. Moreover, like the example, Dasamata, Dasmata is Brahma as the soul of every being, and therefore near is determined by the transcendental word, so that such words cannot imply the invisible knowledge of Brahma, but indicates visible knowledge, and as has already been mentioned that when a thing is rendered visible, there cannot exist any impossible or inconsistent ideas concerning it. Consequently, hearing and the rest are futile. Such a view is inadmissible. Like Raja, in spite of a visible knowledge of his minister by name Bhurchu, who could not know he was his minister because his knowledge, though visible, was mixed with inconsistent ideas. So the transcendental words help the cognition of Brahma and render it apparent or visible. But to such persons whose intellects are clouded with impossible and inconsistent ideas, their blemishes stand in the way of knowledge and hearing, and the rest are necessary for clearing the mind, and one who has already been freed from them stands in no more need for hearing, consideration, and profound contemplation, and he may not practice them. Thus, in effect, the transcendental words and phrases are the means of the acquisition of self knowledge, not so hearing and the rest, which simply destroy the obstacles to such knowledge, so that they are called the cause. Then again, hearing, etc., are him to be mistaken, repeat the same process over and over, always for getting to count the one who was counting. Thus, finding the tenth person missing, they take him for drowned and bewail at his loss, meaning, while another person coming up to them enquires of their grief, and on being informed that their tenth is missing, he points their mistake and shows that none of them is drowned. They are now given vent to feelings of joy as before now they had been expressing their sorrow caused by discrimination and the rest. Consequently, these last are called the means for practicing self knowledge, and one endowed with the four means discrimination, indifference, quiescence, and desire of release is called the qualified person adhikari. 2. Relation. The relation between the subject and the work which treats it is characterized as the condition of the explainer and that thing to be explained. Here, what explains is termed the explainer, and that which is fit to be so explained is called the thing explained. Then again, between the qualified person and the result, phala is a relation characterized as a condition of obtainable prapya and obtainer prapaka, inasmuch as the result is obtainable to the qualified person who is therefore the obtainer. Hence, the obtainable prapya is that which is to be obtained, and the obtainer or prapaka as the individual who obtains it. Between the qualified person and consideration of the subject is a relation characterized as the consideration of an agent or doer and what ought to be done. Here, the qualified person is the doer or agent, and consideration or deliberation of a subject by the exercise of reason is what ought to be done. Kartavya. Therefore, the agent is he who does, makes, performs, or practices what he knows, and what deserves to be so done is called kartabya or proper to be done. Between the work and knowledge is the relation characterized as the condition of product and producer, because due deliberation of the work produces knowledge. Hence it is the percent of knowledge which is a product derived from its study, so that what produces is called the parent or producer, and what is produced is called its product or offspring. Thus is relation set forth. 3. The subject is the identity or oneness of the individual self with the universal spirit, Brahma, which is to be demonstrated in this work and which is the purport of all Vedic utterances, and one contending against such non-duality or who thinks them as twain is unwise and a disputation antagonist of the Vedas. Fourth, the necessity is the acquirement of felicity, which is the essence of Brahma, and to be one with it, and the removal of ignorance, the source of the world, as injurious to and destructive of it. For ignorance is the progenitor of this vast expanse and an efficient cause of birth and death and its attendant miseries. Hence, it is called injurious and harmful. The attainment of supreme facility by the removal of ignorance is called desire of release, moksha, which is the principal aim of the book. Hence, it is called the supreme necessity, while the intermediate avantar necessity is knowledge. Now, the subject of desire, or in other words, what an individual desires to have is called supreme necessity or the chief purport of human life. And as such, desire is for the removal of misery and the acquirement of happiness. It is applicable to all individual, but it is the same as desire for release. Hence, such desire for release is the supreme necessity or the principal aim of human life. It cannot be construed as knowledge, for knowledge is the means of procuring cessation of misery and happiness and not their actual destruction or acqu- acquirement. Hence, it is an intervening necessity. Now, an intervening necessity is such as helps the attainment of the supreme necessity or the principal aim of such a nature is knowledge. For the knowledge derived from a study of the work will procure emancipation, which is the supreme necessity. Hence, knowledge is determined as an intervening necessity. But doubts may accrue as to the validity of what has just been said in the following wise the individuated self is like supreme happiness itself, to say the Vedas. Then for him to procure what he has already got is absurd and inconsistent, for that can refer to a thing which one has not in his possession and not to what he has. To introduce the least trace of such a doubt is injurious to belief. Determine it well by repairing to a kind preceptor for instruction, and it will be found that the apparent contradiction in the obtaining of that which has already been obtained resembles the mistake concerning a bangle said to be lost but which is all along present in the wrist. The oppositionist might say that the destruction of fruitless things and acquirement of supreme facility is said to be the necessity for the work, but such is impracticable because in the Vedas jiva has been linked to supreme bliss, which you also admit. Moreover, acquirement can have reference to a thing which one has not. To apply it otherwise is to create a contradiction, for to obtain what has been always in possession is wholly impossible. Hence, the acquirement of supreme bliss by self, which is always such blissfulness himself, is in every respect contradictory. If anyone be so disposed to question, then that need not create any disbelief in the necessity of the work, but on the other hand, he should repair to a kind preceptor for instruction on self knowledge, so that his doubts may be dispersed by illustrating examples. These examples are as one having a bangle in his wrist may, through mistake caused by forgetfulness or absence of mind, consider it to be lost. He then exclaims, I have lost my bangle, but on discovering his mistake at the instance of another who points to his bangle already there, he is apt to say, I have got it. Here the bangle never left the possession of the owner, yet he took it to be lost from mistake, so that when it was pointed out, he says, I have got it. In other words, practicability of obtaining what is already in possession is thus established. Similarly, by the force of ignorance, a like mistake has to the supreme facility of felicity of self is brought about, and he is inclined to the belief self is unlike such bliss, but Brahma is, and that a separation has taken place between him and Brahma, which by devotional exercises he gains over. A large body of persons are laboring under this mistake. If the greatest of the Pandits will admit the individuated self and Brahma as twain and not one, he is no better than a dunce. If such a dull person, fortunately for good actions, come to hear the percept of a professor on the Vedantic doctrine and acquire it, that is to say, become master of it, by ascertaining its real signification, then he exclaims, I possess the supreme felicity through the kindness of the perceptor and the work itself. Now, such an expression amounts to this, that thou self is supreme blissfulness always, and as such it did exist prior to my being initiated into the meaning teaching of the sacred scriptures, yet as I could not make it out, that does not necessarily established there was a want of it. But on the contrary, from the percepts of his professor, he has learnt it all and knows through intelligence such felicity to be his. Therefore, he says he has now acquired the supreme felicity. Thus is established the necessity of the work for procuring happiness to one who was already its possessor, though from ignorance he could not appreciate till stirred by the kind instruction of a professor, and it need not imply any inconsistency. Similar, Similarly, the destruction of unreal unearth is practicable as in the following illustration. As a fact, no snake exists in a cord at all, yet illusion creates it, which is removed no sooner the person comes to know that it is a bit of rope. In the same way, self is quite a separate entity from the world, which is unreal like the snake, yet from ignorance we confound him with it, sometimes with the gross physical, at other times with the subtle body. Soon sensuous organs, vital airs, intellect and nothing. But by the advent of knowledge we discover our mistake, and as this works seeks to impart the necessary instruction for attaining self-knowledge, consequently its necessity to stop what has already ceased to exist and to procure that which one is already master of is fully established, and that does not imply any contradiction. Now, cessation of the world with its cause, ignorance, and the acquirement of supreme blissfulness is the purport of the work. But from what has already been said, this is clearly impossible, for cessation means destruction, and the two words are convertible terms so that they reduce a thing to a condition of non-existence. Hence the existence and non-existence of desire for release are both expounded by them. If we say that it causes the cessation of a useless thing, then such cessation reduces it into a condition of non-existence. So the acquirement of felicity refers to a condition of existence. Hence both of them cannot be present at one and the same time in the same object. For want and non-want or existence and non-existence are antagonistic of each other, hence they cannot be present at one and the same time in the same substance. Thus, then one may say the necessity for the work is not clearly established. To such a contention, the reply is between cessation of the world and its occupation, the difference is nil, just as the cessation of the snake in the cord is its knowledge. The removal or destruction of ignorance and its product. The world is possession of Brahma, that is knowledge of self. Hence, between such knowledge and the removal of ignorance, the difference is nil, just as the removal or destruction of the snake in a bit of cord is to possess a knowledge of it. That is, proceeds from knowledge a cord, knowing a cord thoroughly. Thus then the destruction of all fancied or imaginary objects in a manner resembles an occupation of them, and the two are non-different according to the opinion of the commentator. Hence the destruction of this apparent and tangible objective world, which is also called fruitless, for it yields no result, is Brahma itself. For Brahma, which occupies it all, is essentially existent and its destruction indicating the same existence, for they have been shown to be equal, and things which are equal to one another are equal to the same thing. Here existence is the same thing, and Brahma and destruction of the world with its cause ignorance being equal, they both refer to existence. The necessity of the work is established. Thou kind Guru, deliver him at once from the chain of consecutive rebirths who reads the first section. Thus are the moving considerations ordinarily declared. So I conclude this video at this stage. Next video will start with section 2. Thank you. Namaskar.